In the quiet farmlands of colonial Virginia, a gnarled oak tree casts a long, eerie shadow across the soil. Beneath it lie 5 gravestones. Each one is simple. Each one nearly identical. They read, William Aldermore, died at 21. Thomas Aldermore, died at 21. James Aldermore, died at 21. Samuel Aldermore, died at 21. Benjamin Aldermore, died at 21. Same last name. Same death age. Same chilling silence surrounding them. At first glance, the story behind these stones sounds like a cruel twist of fate. Some tragic curse that claimed each son at the threshold of manhood. For decades, the deaths were explained away. One fell from a horse. Another was crushed in a barn collapse. A third died during a hunting accident. Accidents, everyone said. Just misfortune. But deep down, the townspeople near Ashwood Manor always felt something was wrong. The Aldermore family had once been the pride of Henrico County. Edmund Aldermore, the patriarch, had arrived from England in the 1680s with land deeds, wealth, and ambition. He married into a respected family and built a tobacco empire, growing Ashwood Manor into one of the most powerful plantations in Virginia. He was admired, feared, and above all, respected. Edmund and his wife, Constance, had 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls. The sons were raised to take over the family business. From a young age, they were taught surveying, labor management, reading ledgers, and handling trade. Everyone believed that William, the eldest, would inherit Ashwood Manor someday. Then Thomas would help expand the lands. James would manage exports. The legacy seemed secure. But none of them made it past 21. It was only in 1987, nearly 300 years later, that the full truth came to light. During a renovation of the Henrico County Courthouse, workers discovered a sealed wooden trunk hidden inside a bricked-up wall. Inside were yellowed documents, a leather-bound journal, and a bundle of coded letters, all belonging to Edmund Aldermore. Historians were stunned. The journal, once deciphered, didn't read like a farmer's notes or family records. It read like a blueprint for murder. Each son's name was listed. Next to it, behavioral notes, fatal weaknesses, and carefully timed plans. The deaths hadn't been accidents. They were scheduled. Edmund Aldermore had systematically eliminated each of his sons before they could legally claim their share of his estate. In colonial Virginia, the law was clear. A son gained legal rights to his father's property at 21. Not through a will, but automatically. If the father died, or if the son reached 21, he could demand land, wealth, even control of the business. Edmund couldn't accept that. He believed no one, not even his own blood, should take what he built. So he made sure they didn't. The chilling part wasn't just that Edmund committed murder. It was that he planned it for years. Long before the boys came of age, he was already designing their deaths. The journal detailed it all: falling beams, faulty saddles, exploding weapons. He knew each son's habits, fears, and routines. And he used that knowledge to set traps so subtle, so convincing, that no one suspected foul play. Until one son didn't die. Thomas, the second eldest, survived his 21st year. And what he uncovered would unravel the most terrifying family conspiracy in early American history. But before that, the world only saw what was on the surface. 5 beautiful boys. 5 sudden deaths. 5 small funerals on the family estate. Each one followed by solemn speeches from Edmund about life's cruelty, God's mysterious ways, and a father's heartbreak. Behind those speeches, however, was a man relieved that his power was still intact. It's easy to miss the horror when it hides behind manners and wealth. But those 5 graves remain, still, silent, waiting to be understood. They're not just markers of death. They are the entrance to a truth long buried, one that shook a family, a town, and eventually, the very idea of what a father's love is supposed to mean. Edmund Aldermore was not the kind of man who believed in sharing. Not his land. Not his influence. Not even with his own children. To the outside world, he appeared successful, even noble. A man who brought wealth and order to the untamed soil of Virginia in the late 1600s. He built Ashwood Manor on fertile land just west of the James River, and within a few decades, he was one of the richest landowners in the region. His fields produced some of the finest tobacco in the colonies, and his name was respected in both trade circles and government meetings. Behind the manor's grand facade, though, Edmund wasn't thinking about community or family prosperity. He was thinking about control, how to maintain it, how to protect it, how to never lose it. When he married Constance Hartwell, the match was a social victory. She was intelligent, graceful, and came from a respected English family. They had 7 children, 5 sons and 2 daughters, and from the moment each boy was born, Edmund started calculating. Not their potential, not their futures, but how many years he had before they would become a threat. In colonial Virginia, the law was brutally simple. Once a male heir turned 21, he had the legal right to claim his inheritance, regardless of whether his father approved. There were no loopholes, no delays. A son could demand land, wealth, and power the moment he reached adulthood. And for a man like Edmund, that was unthinkable. He saw his estate as something he built from the ground up, something no child, no matter how obedient or smart, could ever truly deserve. To him, love was conditional, and loyalty was expected. A son's role was to serve, not to inherit. And so, Edmund made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He would give his sons everything, until they turned 21. Then, he would take it all away. The first son, William, was bright and full of ideas. He wanted to modernize the plantation, improve the living conditions for the enslaved laborers, and trade directly with merchants in Europe. He questioned his father's outdated systems, challenging old methods and proposing reforms. Edmund watched in silence. He never raised his voice. He never argued. But in his private journal, he began to sketch plans. William's death would need to look like an accident, a tragic moment, something no one could blame. Thomas, the second son, was more reserved, calculating, loyal. But even Thomas showed signs of independent thinking. He began making suggestions about land division and estate efficiency, comments that hinted he might someday want a piece of a legacy to shape in his own way. Edmund began noting Thomas's routines too. Each of the boys had something in them, some spark of ambition or morality, that Edmund saw as disobedience. It didn't matter how much they loved him or how hard they worked. Their very existence was a legal countdown to losing control. By the time James, Samuel, and Benjamin were old enough to speak, Edmund already had strategies forming for each of them. He observed their habits. He took mental notes. He studied them the way a general studies a battlefield, calculating angles, timing, and vulnerabilities. The girls, Margaret and Catherine, were spared his scrutiny. As daughters, they had no legal claim to the estate. Edmund regarded them with distance, but no threat. They were to marry well and serve as tools for alliance, nothing more. Constance, the children's mother, began to sense something was wrong as the years passed. Edmund became more private, more distant from the boys as they grew. He stopped smiling at birthdays. He seemed tense when they spoke of future plans. And after William's sudden death on his 21st birthday, something cold settled over the household. Edmund grieved publicly, but Constance noticed he never wept. He never locked himself away in sorrow. He never touched William's belongings again, not with pain, but with finality, as if a problem had been solved. And then it began again, the same pattern, the same eerie calm when Thomas neared 21. Constance didn't yet know what her husband was doing, but something inside her stirred, an instinct, a chill in the bones. Her sons were not just unlucky. Something far darker was happening behind the walls of Ashwood Manor. And if no one stopped it, none of the boys would live long enough to become men. When William died on his 21st birthday, no one asked too many questions. It was a freak accident. He was crushed beneath a stack of heavy tobacco barrels in the old curing barn. The timbers had weakened with time, they said. The structure was old. William, being responsible, had gone to inspect it alone that morning. By the time they found him, it was too late. The entire county mourned. William had been well-liked, kind, and clever. The funeral was large. Edmund delivered a speech so moving. Some wept openly. But behind his grieving father mask, Edmund felt something closer to victory than sorrow. 1 threat removed. 4 to go. Thomas, the second eldest, was next in line. Unlike William, Thomas was quiet, observant. He didn't voice grand ideas or challenge his father openly. But that didn't matter. Edmund knew how the law worked. Whether Thomas was obedient or not, once he turned 21, the estate would begin to slip from his fingers. He had already begun planning Thomas's death before William was buried. This time, it would be different. A more elaborate plan. No suspicious barn collapse. Edmund wanted the death to happen far from Ashwood Manor, with no trail that led back to him. So, he started crafting a false business deal, claiming a Dutch tobacco merchant wanted to meet them outside Richmond. The meeting would take place on April 15, 1709, Thomas's 21st birthday. The route there passed through Miller's Creek Forest, a stretch of road infamous for bandit activity. Edmund saw it as the perfect cover. What Thomas didn't know was that his father had hired 2 local criminals to stage a robbery. Their instructions were simple. Kill Thomas, take a few ledgers and bags of coin to make it look convincing, and disappear. But this time, someone was watching. Martha Henley, the housekeeper who had been with the family for decades, had always suspected something strange about William's death. She remembered how calm Edmund was afterward, how quickly he shut off William's room. And now, she saw the same coldness in his face as Thomas's birthday approached. She began to watch Edmund closely. She noticed the secret meetings in his study, the letters he sent out through back channels, the way he double-checked the barn tools, even though no repairs were scheduled. Something felt off. So she did what few in her position would dare. She warned Constance. At first, Constance couldn't believe it. Her husband, a murderer? No, not Edmund. Not the man she married. But deep down, she already knew. William's death had never felt right. And now, she was being told her second son was in danger. Still, the fear lingered. For weeks, no one used the main stairs. The boys refused to ride without inspecting their gear first. Benjamin didn't touch his rifles. The shadow Edmund left was long and deeply embedded. Even after his trial was announced, whispers spread in town. Was it just him? Did he have allies? Were there other fathers like him? The idea that a man would systematically destroy his own children to protect his property was more than a crime. It was a kind of horror no one wanted to imagine. But Ashwood Manor stood as proof. And while Edmund awaited judgment in a stone cell, his family began something he never could have imagined. They began to heal. On a cloudy morning in early 1710, Edmund Aldemore was taken from his prison cell and brought to a small public square in Richmond. He didn't resist. He didn't plead for forgiveness. As he stood before the gathered crowd, his face bore no sign of regret, no sorrow, no guilt. He looked out at his community, at the people he had lied to, the family he had nearly destroyed, and said only this: "I preserved what was mine. Let that be remembered." Those were his last words. Minutes later, the man who murdered his own sons to protect his fortune was gone. But the damage he caused wasn't undone by the fall of a rope. The Aldemore family was left to rebuild, not just their lives, but their name. They had inherited a legacy soaked in fear, betrayal, and silence. But they would not carry that legacy forward. Instead, one by one, they began to reshape it. Constance Aldemore, the woman who had once stood by her husband in church pews and community gatherings, was the first to act. In the weeks following Edmund's execution, she made a bold and historic move. She emancipated every enslaved person on the Aldemore estate. Over 70 men, women, and children were granted their freedom. But Constance didn't stop there. She paid them wages to stay on as free workers, offered them land to lease, and even used a portion of the estate's wealth to fund a small school for their children. For her, this wasn't just a moral act. It was a declaration. Ashwood will no longer thrive on pain, she told a local preacher. It will grow on justice. Thomas, the son who had survived Edmund's ambush and uncovered the journal, never left the manor. But he didn't live as its lord. He became its guardian. He founded the Aldemore Trust, an early legal initiative that supported children whose lives were endangered by inheritance disputes or abuse from guardians. Over time, it expanded into one of the first colonial organizations advocating for family protection laws. James, the third son, pursued law. Inspired by the coded writings and forged documents Edmund used to manipulate property rights, he specialized in estate law. His career was devoted to making sure no parent could ever again alter a will or manipulate legal gaps to strip their children of rightful inheritance or their lives. Samuel, who had narrowly avoided a fatal fall from a sabotaged saddle, became a social reformer. He lobbied for safer equipment standards on plantations and estates, and pushed for systems to investigate accidental deaths among young heirs. His voice brought change in how safety was viewed, not just in industry, but inside the home. Benjamin, the youngest, the boy who once idolized his father, joined the colonial militia. But he never fought for power or territory. He focused on internal safety, often helping villages investigate suspicious deaths or disappearances. For the rest of his life, he hunted monsters that wore friendly faces. Even the daughters, Margaret and Catherine, who had never been targets of Edmund's plot, carried their family's burden with courage. Margaret founded a home for orphan girls, many of whom had lost parents under suspicious circumstances. Catherine became a teacher and helped open the first school in their county for children of freed families. Together, the Aldemore children did something few believed possible. They rewrote their family name. What once was associated with quiet funerals and strange patterns of death became known for advocacy, justice, and healing. The story of the 5 headstones, once symbols of defeat, became a public warning. A tale that parents whispered to their children, not to scare them, but to teach them. Power without love becomes destruction. In time, Ashwood Manor was sold. The new owners kept the original chapel and the old oak tree. They turned the site into a memorial garden. Tourists still visit to this day, often drawn by the eerie legend of the sons, who all died at 21. But those who look closer see something more. There are 6 gravestones now. William, the first to die, lies there. So does Edmund. But beside them are stones for Constance, Thomas, and the others etched with words like defender, healer, founder, protector. Edmund tried to bury his legacy in silence. His children chose to bury it in truth. Desperate and afraid, she turned to Dr. Marcus Fairfax, a longtime friend of the family who had helped deliver several of the children. He was a man of logic, but also one who had quietly suspected something wasn't right with Edmund. He agreed to help. The night before Thomas was to leave for the business trip, Constance begged him not to go. But Thomas was determined. He didn't believe the warnings. "It's just a meeting, Mother," he said. "Father needs me. We'll be back before sundown." Dr. Fairfax, however, didn't take any chances. He quietly followed them out of the estate at dawn, staying out of sight. When the attack happened, 2 masked men leaping from the trees with pistols, Fairfax intervened just in time. One of the attackers fled. The other was caught. And when Thomas turned on his father, demanding an explanation, Edmund's response was chillingly calm. "They were meant to scare you," he lied. "You need to understand the dangers of business." But Thomas knew better. And when he searched his father's travel satchel, he found something damning. A letter with directions to the ambush site, marked with a time and instructions written in Edmund's own hand. The truth was undeniable. Thomas survived. But he came home a different man. He no longer looked up to his father. He no longer trusted the silence of the house or the whispers of accidents. And when Martha showed him the hidden journal she had found behind Edmund's locked cabinet, a book filled with notes on all the boy's behaviors, habits, and weaknesses, Thomas realized with horror. William's death had been the beginning. James, Samuel, and Benjamin were next. And unless they acted quickly, 3 more brothers would die. After Edmund's arrest, the atmosphere at Ashwood Manor didn't bring relief. It brought panic. Yes, the man himself was gone, but the danger he created was far from over. Thomas had uncovered the murder plot meant for him. The journal Martha found confirmed what few could believe. Edmund Aldemore had designed every son's death with surgical precision. But the most terrifying part wasn't just the crimes he had committed, it was what he still had planned. The journal revealed everything. Coded entries, symbols, hand-drawn diagrams of buildings, tools, and accident scenes, most marked with the boys' names and specific dates. Every page suggested there were more mechanisms already in place. Some were complete. Some were halfway done. But all were dangerous. They found detailed plans for James's accident. A workshop floor rigged with weakened supports. If James, who often spent his time building things, walked on a certain section carrying tools, it would collapse. Nails had been partially pulled. Boards had been hollowed out from underneath. It was clever, precise, and nearly invisible. For Samuel, the plan was worse. He loved horses. So Edmund had a stable worker unknowingly adjust one of his saddles. A leather strap was cut, then sewn back loosely, so that after a certain amount of wear, it would tear completely. A fall at high speed, fatal and untraceable. Benjamin, the youngest and most enthusiastic about hunting, was to die from a misfire. One of his rifles had already been tampered with. The powder compartment was replaced with an unstable mix. When fired, the gun would explode in his hands. Thomas, now driven by fear and fury, launched into action. With Dr. Fairfax and a few trusted workers, he led a room-by-room inspection of the estate. They removed every weapon, tool, and saddle. They dismantled stairs and floors. They found 3 more hidden hazards, some in active use. The staff, horrified to learn they'd been part of the plot without realizing it, were in shock. The blacksmith had adjusted the saddle per Edmund's orders. The carpenter had replaced beams using measurements he was given, not knowing they'd been hollowed first. Even the groundskeeper had repositioned barrels and crates in the barn, never suspecting they were being used to stage deadly traps. It became clear Edmund hadn't acted alone. He had orchestrated his entire household like a machine, giving small, precise instructions to different people, each unaware of the bigger picture. It was a symphony of deception, and every note had been played to deadly effect. Meanwhile, in jail, Edmund refused to cooperate. When questioned by the local authorities, he didn't deny the journal was his. In fact, he didn't even seem ashamed. "You people think inheritance is a right," he said. "But it's not. It's earned. These boys didn't build anything. They were going to waste it all." "Even if that were true," the sheriff replied, "they were your sons." "They were heirs," Edmund corrected. "And heirs take. I only ensured they didn't take what was mine." When asked if there were more traps, more letters, more people involved, Edmund simply smiled. "You'll find them. Or you won't. Either way, I win." Back at Ashwood, Constance began piecing together the emotional cost. For years, she had watched her husband grow colder. Now she understood why. Every gentle smile he had offered their sons had been a lie. Every family meal, every lesson, every birthday, they were moments in a countdown. She was devastated, but she refused to let the terror paralyze her. She gathered her children and made a choice. They would not live in fear of the ghost Edmund tried to become. Thomas publicly declared that every trap had been disarmed. He opened the manor to inspection by the local court. The journal was turned over as evidence. Every staff member who had unknowingly contributed to the plot was cleared but required to testify. And the estate itself, Ashwood Manor, would be transformed. It would no longer be a symbol of silence and control. It would become a monument of survival.